Hi everyone for today's webinar with Kumi now. We're glad that we're all ready to listen for another day. Today is going to be a very special day, especially Jennifer, who's with us. She is going to be talking to us today. She's a very close friend. Uh, Although, Jen, the only time we had the chance to meet you and I was when you came here and then the war started. So we never actually met.
Yeah, we were maybe a kilometer apart and never got to be together face to face.
And then
So,
the war started and you had to leave. Yes, unfortunately.
yeah, yeah.
But yes, today
Inshallah soon.
inshallah soon. So today we're going to be talking about the freedom of speech, the freedom of press. And since Jennifer, she with a group, and I'm with them, we just started a podcast. We thought, it will be a good opportunity since the idea of podcast is something that is spreading very widely everywhere, and it is one way of the freedom of speech and freedom of press. To introduce Jennifer, she's going to more talk about this stuff. Jennifer Maindrand is a scholar, educator, and an activist. She holds a PhD in Bible and Cultures from Drew University, and her research focuses on the weaponization of the biblical texts and geopolitical in Palestine, Israel. Jen is a co-host of Across the Divide podcast. It's a podcast that provides space for thoughtful and critical conversations that reflect on the situation in Palestine, Israel, through the lens of Christians' faith, theology, and the Bible. Jen, it's all yours.
Thank you, Salim. It's really wonderful to be gathered here together with everyone this evening, this morning, wherever you might be. Thank you for that kind introduction. And I think I'll start off by saying I don't feel like the most equipped person to speak on the idea of free speech, and yet I'll try and we can have a conversation here today. And I'm very grateful to be here. So I'll talk a little bit more about Across the Divide podcast that Salim mentioned in just a little bit, and I'm happy to share more about that if it's not something that you're familiar with. But I think I want to start off this conversation here today by saying that such a time as this to talk about free speech, as we are in the midst, at least here in the United States, of, we're about a week and a half, 2 weeks in, to this incredible display of solidarity and protest showed by college students and faculty across the U.S. in solidarity with Palestine, protesting the war on Gaza, asking for their universities to divest from funding weapons of mass destruction in Israel. And as of this morning, the numbers that I pulled, April 30th, there are more than 1,100 students and faculty who have been arrested across the U.S. And now these protests have expanded outside of the U.S. in Australia, Canada, France, Italy, the U.K. Students are standing up in mass in an incredibly brave and beautiful display of protest and solidarity. And while they're doing that, their First Amendment rights, their right to peacefully protest, their right to free speech is being challenged. And so this should be of great concern to us wherever we are, whether we're Americans or US citizens or not. And one of the reasons is because young people, and especially students, historically have played such an important role in protesting war and in protesting the decisions, the funding of their nations to participate in war and in genocide. So students were instrumental in protesting the Vietnam War in the 70s in the US. I am based in Ohio, which at that time there was a there were students protesting en masse at Kent State University in Ohio. Ohio State troopers were called in, eventually ended up not only deploying tear gas, but open firing on students. And that sparked protests, over 1,000 protests across the country at universities. And those protests actually were instrumental in the U.S. pulling troops out of Cambodia at the beginning of the Vietnam War. And similarly, students played a very important role in protesting apartheid in South Africa. And so this moment is not one to take lightly, and unfortunately, the violent response of policing of students and faculty that we're seeing also has historic precedents. We've seen this before, and yet it's shocking, and yet it's surprising, right? When we do see these things, and so I would just encourage. I know there will be action at the end of this, but encourage you wherever you are to find an org or group that you can get plugged into. There's great organizing happening state by state or even more locally to support student orgs, to support human rights organizations that are mobilizing to protect the rights of these students. So that's a little bit of the backdrop that's here as we're gathering today. While genocide in Gaza is ongoing. And so I don't know about anyone on this call, but the last few weeks have been especially tough for me, holding all of these pieces together, trying to stay up to date, right, on the continued starvation attacks in Gaza, on increased attacks, shootings in the West Bank, throughout Palestine, and now attacks and threats against the lives of students who are protesting this war. So I think, some other things that we're seeing in terms of restrictions of free speech, especially related to the university, which I'll just note is just deeply ironic. A space that is supposed to be one that's created for the free exchange of ideas is now where heavy policing is happening. So universities certainly across the U.S., but also internationally, there's been resistance to student groups forming and student activism even before this kind of mass spread of encampment started. There have been faculty suspensions and arrests of anything from faculty who have spoken out in the past in solidarity with Palestine, faculty who speak with any sort of criticism towards Israel's actions in the war on Gaza, or even faculty who are simply being a support person for student groups who are forming on campus and agreeing to be an advisor or to hold space for students. We're also seeing some of those folks being restricted and suspended. And there's a renowned Palestinian feminist scholar, Nadara Shalhoub-Kevorkian, who teaches at Hebrew University in Jerusalem, who was arrested a week and a half ago, detained and treated brutally by Israeli forces, and now has a trial going on because she spoke out against the genocide in Gaza. And so, and all of this, I just want to zoom out a little bit. Not only all of this is happening in context of an ongoing 7-month genocide on Gaza, where the most in-depth and accurate reporting that the world has been able to access is from young Palestinians on social media, mostly those who are 25 years or younger. And so I think that says something about freedom of speech and press and the barriers that we have to this kind of information. And then the even larger context behind that is that 2023 was the deadliest year for Palestinians, the most Palestinian deaths since the Second Intifada, already by January of 2023. So January 2023, 1 month into the year, it was already the highest number of deaths of Palestinians that had been seen since the early 2000s. That's before any war or siege on Gaza. That was from sieges, attacks, military and settler violence in the West Bank against Palestinians. And so those are the realities that most of us that there are barriers placed between us and our news sources, the news that we read and hear in our day-to-day lives, especially those of us who primarily use Western news sources. Those are the realities that we tend to be more likely unaware of. And so, again, this is the context in which we're having this conversation today. And so I just wanted to go back a little bit so that we have some of those layers, a little bit more context. And for those of us who are Christians, which I understand might be a majority of us on this call, there are other barriers in place, not only to understanding the complexities of the realities that exist in Palestine and Israel, but we have this other kind of barrier that's a theological barrier, theological blinders, right? That often inhibit us in the ways that we're normalized in our communities, inhibit us from seeing the violences of our theologies, the violence of Christian Zionism in particular. Many of us grow up in environments where there is what many of us call default Christian Zionism, this Christian Zionism that kind of lives in the theological waters, in our church lives, in the things that we hear, and they go unexamined, right? We wouldn't identify as a Christian Zionist, but we've heard these things about God's chosen people, about the people of Israel, about the great things that the nation state of Israel has done. And also hear these things about the dehumanized Palestinians, that talk about them not as Palestinians, but as Arabs more broadly, and assume violence, militarism, etc. And so I think all of this just kind of leads to what I'll share about this beautiful movement that has been going for a long time. It's not a new movement, but that has gotten new energy in the last 7 months in light of the war on Gaza. There are so many organizations like Sabil, like Fazna, like Churches for Middle East Peace, who have been doing this work for a long time to shift the ways that the church interacts with, engages with the implications of our theology in Palestine and Israel, the way that our theologies get mapped onto real lives and real places and real communities, the land itself, the people that live there. And so it's been, as much as the last 7 months have been devastating, it's been so encouraging to see this new surgence and to see this influx of young people who are bringing really, really good questions to the table, and who are leaders in some of this active resistance. And so Salim and I both are a part of a team of Palestinian and American Christians who started Across the Divide podcast. The project was actually in the works before October. It was in the works about 1.5 years before that, but we were slow going to get it started. We spent a lot of time thinking about how might we use this platform where there are a lot of honest conversations happening. It's a form of media that's easy for a lot of people to engage in, especially right now, especially young people. How might we use this to encourage and provide space for honest conversations about theology, about Christian faith, and about Palestine and Israel in ways that we weren't seeing that happening, or we weren't seeing space for it in most Christian spaces, especially in evangelical or evangelical adjacent spaces. And so in October, we launched the podcast. And so we've been going 6-7 months now. And we have conversations with Palestinian, with American Christians about and around the question of, what does the life and person and call of Jesus, how does that invite us to engage in the realities in Palestine? How does that invite us to respond, mobilize in response to a genocide? And so we have Palestinian theologians, church leaders, and American church leaders who are part of leading this movement. And so we've also had some Jewish American leaders who are who've been a really important part of this movement of Jewish voices resisting that this genocide be carried out in the name and tradition of the Jewish people. And so the more that I think some of what we're learning now is that this is an effective way to build community, and this is an effective way to do public education, where folks can have access to information like this in other areas where it's becoming more and more difficult to have honest conversations in church spaces, increasingly in the space of universities and higher education. How can we do this important work of contextualizing the history that's at play here, while also kind of bringing some of us up to speed with what the implications of this are and how we might be entangled in that, right? How we, as average American or Canadian or British or what have you, Christians, how are we complicit in the occupation and in the suffering of the Palestinian people? So I don't want to ramble too long and take us maybe a place that's off topic or unhelpful or uninteresting, but maybe I'll leave it there for now and we can be in conversation.
Thank you, Jen. This will definitely give us good time to exactly have a discussion, questions. So please, if you do have any questions, either write them in a chat or you can just raise your hand and we can just, unmute. To actually add, Jen, to what you were saying, especially at the beginning of the war, the Israeli government announced a law, between quotations, that they have the full right to determine who can speak and what can they speak. And unfortunately, that automatically that shifted only towards Palestinians and Arabs and people who are not in support of the war, and they and that's created a lot of fear. We've heard a lot of people, they've been arrested, a lot of teachers, a lot of doctors, a lot of people that are Arabs within Israel who have been arrested. They've been fired from their jobs, suffered a lot of attacks by people because of not freedom of speech.
Yeah, I thank you for saying that, Salim, because I think that law has not been talked about a ton, at least in kind of Western media or even on social media. Like I am most familiar with it because like through being in conversation with friends with Palestinian and Palestinians with Israeli citizenship, this law that allows the police to seize personal property and especially phones and look at any of the accounts of any citizens. And again, as Salim's saying, this is mostly directed towards Palestinians and Palestinian citizens of Israel. And so we've been in conversation with friends who know so many people who have been arrested because of something that they posted on social media. Arrests happening for people using the word occupation, right? Not even talking about genocide on Gaza, just using the word occupation. And so those are grave threats against the freedom of speech of Israeli and Palestinian citizens alike. And I know that in the context of Israel and the Israeli government too, this comes at a time where Israelis have been very unsatisfied with their government, and kind of a unique time where not only within Israeli society, but I think globally, there's a slow recognition that perhaps Israel is not the Western democracy that it's been kind of touted as for years. And so we're seeing the same silencing of Israelis as well, who are speaking out either against the occupation, but especially now, who are just advocating for a hostage deal I saw news that just yesterday, Israeli police used water cannons against protesters who were protesting in favor of a hostage deal and asking that happen immediately. So again, the police violence and response to citizens speaking up and advocating on this issue during this time is sort of across the board.
Yes, we actually do have one question so far. We are complicit when we don't boycott and also when we don't offer a plan to solve the injustice without harming Jewish or Palestinians. A way forward. We can speak about this freely, whereas the Israelis and Palestinians cannot. What do you think about this, Jen?
Yeah, so I do think that boycotts are a really effective way of using the kind of people and purchasing power that we have to resist active complicity or active support of the occupation. And I do think it's important for any of us to be involved in conversations about active and live possibilities and solutions for justice and safety and dignity and human rights for all who live in the land. And at the same time, I think it's very important that we recognize our positionality in this, right? That as if we are not Palestinians or Israelis, that we are right, that we are outsiders in a sense, and that we are not the saviors or the fixers of this situation. Western Christianity has an unfortunate history of doing this, right? Of coming in with the solution and kind of handing it over, implementing it in contexts that are not our own. And so I think we need to be mindful of our positionality there. But I think there are some really important spaces where Palestinians and Israelis are doing this together and have been for a long time, of taking ownership of these conversations and saying, okay, it's not just the diplomats and the leaders who get to say what rights we might have and when and where, but we, the people, actually have power in that. So I'm thinking especially of the Parents Family Circle, who are and Combatants for Peace. So two organizations that are Palestinians and Israelis who resist the occupation together and resist violence, any sort of violence within Palestine and Israel. And I'm thinking about that especially because Combatants for Peace has an annual joint memorial ceremony every May and June to remember the Nakba, and to remember the histories of all those who have been lost in these decades of violence and occupation. So there are important spaces, I think, where we can support and contribute and be a part of, but at the same time, let Palestinians and Israelis lead those conversations.
Actually, I do have a quick question before we move on. Is it true? I know that I don't know if it's in the States, but I've heard that in the West, there are some places now they're making it illegal or something by law that when Palestinians or just protesters or people, when they chant or say Palestine is free from the river to the sea, it's considered illegal, or you cannot say it. It's like you could be persecuted by it, right? Or something like this. I mean, I don't know if you know more about this.
Yeah, that is the case. And I was actually, just before we got on the call, I was doing a little research. So in the last couple of years, there have been new laws put into place state by state that are a violation of First Amendment rights, but that have been restricting the ability for individuals, organizations, companies to participate in boycotts of Israel, claiming that such boycotts are anti-Semitic in nature. And so now there is a new law that's been put forth, which is HR 6090. And this is a law that is attempting to crystallize in law a definition of anti-Semitism and have a sort of law across the board of how that should be responded to or restricted. And so this would be an immense restriction of the freedom of speech, especially in university spaces, but in plenty of other public and private spaces as well. Yeah, I just saw someone put in the chat, the film Boycott is a really great way to get that information of the history of this very recent these anti-boycott laws. So,
Randy, yes, please.
Sure. Regarding the question of that legislation on from the river to the sea phrase, that was something that was it was not a bill in the sense that it would become law. It was a measure that the House of Representatives passed that was sort of their sense of things. So that isn't something that has gone to the Senate, nor would it be likely at this point to pass, but it was something that was just in the House of Representatives. So.
Thank you. Jan, we do have a question. Has the reach of your podcast increased since your launch, since we launched it? Do you have any idea about the nature of your audience?
Yeah, those are great questions. And thank you, Randy, for speaking to the particularities of that resolution or the bill that was put forth. I did not know that. And so I didn't want to speak to that specifically about restrictions on using from the river to the sea. Yeah, so Across the Divide podcast has grown significantly since we started and continues to grow day by day, which is something that we honestly were not anticipating. We've kind of been joking all along that like, oh, there's people listening who are not our family and friends. And so that's a start. That's encouraging. But yeah, it has grown significantly. We're getting really great engagement with it. The nature of our audience is about 3/4 are based in the U.S. or Americans. The majority of our audience are young people, this kind of age range from 18 to 45, which is what that was our target age range to begin with. And so it's exciting to see that that's the majority of people who are engaging with it. Our audience is, there's a slight majority of female listeners, which I'm not sure what that means, but I know that women have been leading the way in issues like this for a long time. And so I'll just say that I'm not surprised. But there has been a beautiful community that's been built through the podcast on Instagram and even through some other modes where folks can interact and add questions and engage with different conversations that we're having. And so from what we know too is that a lot of our audience are folks who are in evangelical or evangelical adjacent communities, people who have a core commitment to the gospel, and who also have questions or who are committed to solidarity with Palestine. And so I'll just say that I have worked in a number of different kind of inter-Christian and denominational spaces in the States on Israel and Palestine. And I haven't really seen anything like this before. And so it's really, really beautiful and deeply encouraging. And we've also gotten to build relationships with a good number of people who were not engaged in Palestine prior to October 2023. And so these are people who are committed to the gospel, are living a sort of Jesus way, who may have been engaged in other social justice issues before, but not Palestine. And so they're trying to catch up, right? They've seen what has happened since the genocide in Gaza began. They are advocating in their communities, but they're also educating themselves on, okay, what do I need to know about the context and the history, and continuing to parse through the theologies of Christian Zionism, of supersessionism that so many of us have. And so that has been, again, very, very encouraging to see.
We have a question. What are the needs of Christians and Christian leaders in the West to help them take more actions both now and later? Yeah.
Yeah, this is a really good question, and again, I'm not the most equipped person to answer it, but I think I think one of the most important things that's needed is not for them to know all the facts, is not even for them to know the history, um, but for them to see Palestinian humanity and freedom as as something that's central to the gospel. I think it's important for leaders to see how this is not a just a political issue. It's not just one of those other like social justice hot button issues that their congregants might be handing them materials on that they want them to engage in. It's not that. It's that caring for the humanity and the lives of every person created in the image of God, and actually doing something to protect those lives. And so, you know, one of our co-hosts on the project, on the podcast, Daniel Bonora, he recently said something to the extent of the 34,000 deaths of Gazans that we've seen. That's 34,000 times we've denied or violated the image of God in another person. And so I think it's a theological crisis. It's a biblical crisis. It's a crisis for the church. And so in this season, I've been a part of a group, a small group, but kind of a thinking group working on how do we do the small work of educating and drawing our communities into engagement with Palestine in a way that's effective. This is, again, for church communities. And so we've been having conversations about relationships with pastors and with Christian leaders and what they might be open to hearing or engaging with or not. And I have spent time, I worked with Churches for Middle East Peace, working with church leaders across the states in a variety of Christian traditions. And there are some incredible Christian leaders that have been speaking out on this for a long time, that have been advocating for justice for Palestinians and Israelis for a long time, but especially in the last 7 months, where there has been an explosion of that. But I will say, from my experience, what I've seen is the real movement, the bulk of the movement that happens in Christian communities is from those who are lay leaders. It's from those who lead small groups and church, kind of leadership groups and other initiatives. It's from those who are devoted to the small details in the life of the church, and who are committed to organizing movie screenings and conversation groups and book studies and Bible studies and bringing Palestinians and Israelis to their churches to speak. Right? It's not. It can be both and, but I think sometimes for those of us who really want to make a difference in this work in the Christian community, we often look to changing the minds of pastors and leaders. But oftentimes it's the people like us who are really kind of doing that work. And so I find that incredibly encouraging. But I'll make sure to put a few links in the chat for Churches for Middle East Peace and also for Christians for a Free Palestine, which is a grassroots Christian movement that's popped up across the states, and they've been organizing monthly mobilization calls that did a recent action in DC. And so it's been hard to keep track of all of the different groups that are popping up. And I think that's actually a good thing, right? For those of us to join in and be a part of whatever kind of group and organizing that's happening in the space closest to ours, I think that's where we can be most effective. If that's on a national scale, great. If that's on a state level, awesome. If it's denominational, that can be great. But there are so many groups like this, Black Christians for a Free Palestine too, that are really committed to working with smaller communities of Christians and churches, so that we can do the tedious and necessary work of investigating the ways that our spiritual practices and our theologies are complicit in the sort of larger structures of violence.
Even Jewish Voices for Peace there also, we could, yeah.
Yes.
A question: how do Palestinians handle keeping the data in their iPhones clear of association that would put them in jeopardy of violating anti-Semitic discriminatory speech law? If I could just add one thing, or just reply to it in one sentence. According to Christian Zionism or even the Israeli government, my existence is anti-Semitic. So it doesn't
Yes.
matter about my phone or my data.
Yes. Yeah, I'm not sure that I don't think I can answer this question better than you, Salim, but yeah, I'm not sure that there is a way to parse out and make one's own communications, or like Salim saying, even one's own identity appear as innocent. I think that there's already so much stacked up against Palestinians, not to mention that most are in between some sort of status of citizenship with, without being afforded the rights that a citizen of Israel receives, for example. So I think, yeah, I'm not sure that there's much that can be done if your device is taken or your accounts are kind of searched. I think
actually, to tell you actual experience, we literally, especially like in the West Bank, living here, so different than in Jerusalem, different than in 48 in Israel, where there is direct contact. Especially in Jerusalem, you could actually be in any moment in confronting soldiers. So you have to be aware of what you have in your devices, of whatever pictures and songs and whatever data or things. But like, for example, for me in the West Bank, so when I go visit my family, I automatically leaving Bethlehem, going to Ramallah, I'm going to pass a couple of checkpoints. The first thing I do is I have to go through my picture list. I have to go through my apps and delete them, literally uninstall some of the apps, because just even apps where you just gather some information, like just follow the news for Israel, these are considered like you're getting some anti-Semitic news, and so basically I will be detained or punished, or they break my phone, and even the way they treat is a violation of anything. And so yes, it is not safe. If you're noticing, one of the main reasons, if you're actually engaging a lot, you would notice that there isn't much of a very loud, strong Palestinian voice, a Christian, Muslim, whoever, but a Palestinian voice from within Palestine. The reason is because we are not just afraid, we're literally under the threat of being persecuted in any way possible, because they want to deny us our freedom of speech. If it wasn't for you, it wasn't for Jen, if it wasn't for many of the people, if it wasn't for the students in the universities who are now continuing to speak, we the death toll in Gaza could have been doubled. The situation here could have been worse, I guess. I mean, so yeah.
Yeah, Salim, we have friends, right, who have been not just going through their pictures and their apps, but deleting half, 3/4 of their contacts, trying to scrub everything just because of this fear. So whether one is interrogated or not, that fear is like such a thick veil over the ways in which Palestinians exist in their everyday lives, that it's not something that you really get to disconnect yourself from. And so that weight is very, very heavy. But in relation to the last point that you just made, Salim, I recently watched the film Nyla and the Uprising, and was reminded of this very vibrant movement of Palestinian and Palestinian women-led resistance again in the first Intifada. And I was just thinking about how vastly the landscape has changed, so that today, after so many years of intense occupation, and especially since the second Intifada, that there is hardly any room, any space for Palestinians to speak out, let alone organize another movement like that, because of the intense surveillance and military occupation. So that, yeah, we're not seeing those voices and that leadership because it's made nearly impossible.
So we could actually move on to our call to actions. I mean, I do have a question, but I think there is no answer to it. It's just a question to really think about. Since the beginning of the war, there has been this question that has been always circling around: why we do not see international journalists in Gaza, and only the international media receives their news only, or at least not only, but the majority of it comes only from the military speakers in the Israeli military. And how could that be a freedom of speech? This has been asked a lot. Why don't you let international press to come into Gaza and let them document exactly what's going on? And unfortunately, until today, very few, if probably if not much at all, that have been in, and that is the question of today, I guess, to the situation.
Yeah.
Jennifer, since I am with you, I would actually say, but you can as well say it. We encourage you all to really join our podcast. And Jen, you could, if you want to finish with something, and so we could move on to our call to actions.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Thanks for this conversation, Salim. And yeah, there's a very intentional reason, right, that international journalists are so few are allowed into Gaza. And I think the example that we have from Shireen Abu Akleh, of even just being an American Palestinian reporter in the West Bank being shot point blank by an Israeli sniper, right? Like there is a very, very clear active barrier and resistance to even the international calling out of the violence of occupation. And so I think that can be a reminder to us all, though we may not be students or professors or reporters or public speakers, that we have a voice and a role in whatever space we might inhabit in our communities, in our churches, in our places of work. And so I think, if anything, these kinds of conversations remind me of the importance of our voices, and the ways in which our values or our faith might not just invite us, but really call us to be actively engaged, to use our voices bravely. It's not always safe or comfortable to do so. But one of the recent conversations that I had on Across the Divide with Asmira Hammoudi Davis, an incredible episode, she really reminded me and anyone listening that there might be a reason, like perhaps this is one of those moments where we can recall the scriptures, the scripture of Esther, where God has created you for such a time as this, to use your voice to speak on behalf of those who cannot speak for themselves. So I think I'll leave it there. I saw that the link for the podcast was shared again in the chat. So if you're not someone who likes to listen to podcasts, please think of someone in your life, think of 5 people in your life who you could share it with. It's a really great way for that person you've been working on in conversation with to say, oh, I listened to this conversation and I noticed these things that I thought, you might be interested in or connect to. It's a great way to invite conversation with others who you might already be in conversation with about justice and solidarity with Palestine.
Salama. Thank you so much, Jennifer.
Thank you, Salim.
Yep.
Okay, so I'll jump in for the action part. So Thank you so much, Jennifer, for the words of inspiration. I think we could all use it in this moment. And we have, I guess the first call to action is, sharing Across the Divide podcast. I've listened to a few episodes and the conversations are very meaningful. So, the link is already in the chat. So please share with your friends and family. The second action is a very simple action today, actually related to, I think, the conversation we're having with Jennifer, but Kairos Palestine recently released a call for global action ahead of Nakba Day, May 15th. And I think this year is the 76th year of the Nakba, thinking about that. So I'll share my screen and just read just a little bit of the background and then some of the call to actions. But what we're asking people to do with this document is to share with your church groups, communities you're a part of, since they're requesting, a global call to action with this. So, okay, can you guys see this? Okay, awesome. So I'll read a few, just the background. So in November 2023, Israel Security Cabinet member Avi Dichter declared, "We are now rolling out the Gaza Nakba 2023, that's how it will end." Numbers from the war-torn Gaza Strip are proving Israel's intent. According to the United Nations Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Update Report, on April 15th, 2024, 33,797 Gazans have been killed by Israeli airstrikes, tanks, snipers, and soldiers on the ground. The number of dead still under the rubble is unknown. 76,465 people have been injured, 1.7 million Palestinians, 80% of the population, have been forcibly displaced, while over 14,000 children have been killed and thousands more are presumed buried under the rubble. Another 17,000 children are unaccompanied, meaning their parents have been killed or they have been separated from them. And over 3,000 Palestinians from Gaza were abducted in mass arrest campaigns. Mere numbers too often conceal the suffering. Every Gazan child has been exposed to Israeli military violence, experiencing traumatic injuries, mass displacement, hunger, the destruction of their houses and neighborhoods. And according to the United Nations International Children's Emergency Fund, every child in Gaza, approximately 1 million children, will require mental health and psychosocial support. How are we to respond to Jesus' admonition? "Let the little children come to me, for it is to such as these that the kingdom of God belongs." So I'll skip a little bit from this background and then just go towards the call that Kairos Palestine is asking. So they're saying, "We plead with Christians around the world to use these terms, apartheid, ethnic cleansing, and genocide, to describe the realities that your Palestinian siblings are experiencing. All three, apartheid, ethnic cleansing, and genocide, are defined under international law. The International Court of Justice declared in January that Israel is plausibly committing genocide. In her March 2024 report, Anatomy of a Genocide, United Nations Special Rapporteur on Palestine, Francesca Albanese, concludes that there are reasonable grounds to believe that the threshold indicating Israel's commission of genocide is met. Our call on Nakba Day to churches is to plan vigils and marches to mourn the Palestinians who were killed in Gaza, collecting money for Gazans and Palestinian and Christian organizations who are supporting the Palestinians in Gaza, to pray and push for an immediate end to the genocidal war on Palestinians in Gaza and the West Bank, to pressure your governments to cease sending military assistance to Israel, and to support an immediate, permanent, unconditional ceasefire and ensure the delivery of necessary humanitarian aid. To the international community, to pressure Israel to comply with international law and stop committing the ongoing genocide and ethnic cleansing of Palestinians in Gaza and the West Bank, to exert effective efforts to ensure delivery of humanitarian assistance, including food, medicines, water, and electricity for the people in Gaza, to defend Palestinians' right and duty to resist their oppressors as guaranteed under international law and expressed in the Kairos Palestine moment of truth, and to pressure your governments take concrete measures, including diplomatic and economic sanctions, and immediate freeze the weapons and arms trade with Israel. And then we also have to civil society groups, unions, and all other groups and individuals. But since we're running out of time, I'll pause here. So we request again that you share just one group chat, send out an email. And so I'll leave a few minutes for people to just send this quickly. You can find this, I think Ryan might have linked the document already. But if you've finished, please reply in the chat saying that you've sent it out. And we appreciate all of you for coming today.
If I could also share for what we'll be planning for the next 2 weeks for our Kumi webinars. For next week, we have Tariq Habash. I hope some of you might know him or heard of him. He is going to be joining us where he's going to be talking about the U.S. support to Israel. Tariq Habash was a political appointment and policy advisor in the Department of Education Office of Planning, Evaluating and Policy Development. Actually, Tariq was the second governmental official and the only political appointment to resign from the administration due to its policy on Gaza and the restrictions support for Israelis' aggression against Palestine. He's a very good activist. He was a politician, and he will be joining us for next week. Kumi, of course, you would see if you follow on. We encourage you to follow our website and also social media to see that, and we really encourage you to share that to many of the people. As well, the week after that, we will have Yaqub Ode, who is an old man from Jerusalem. He's going to be sharing his story. It's going to be the 14th of May, where it's the day before the Nakba. So he's going to be sharing his own personal story of what happened during the Nakba. And then the week after that, hopefully our plan is to have a joint webinar with multiple people from different universities in the United States, where we definitely need to hear from them and what's going on in the universities. Now, I hope until then, maybe their push and their motivation will actually end everything. But hey, let's see what happens then. So this is what we're going to be in the next 3 weeks. We really encourage you to share and have more people to join us. We will be sharing all of these details on our website and our social media for you to actually have access as well to share to your friends. So thank you for that as well.
Okay, so I hope everyone was able to access the document. I know there's a few people left here, so thank you again for coming, and we'll see you next week.